Thank you for coming. So this is our third of 4 talks during Ethics Week here, which we do every February. And my name's Adam Trunk. I work with a couple other people to help pull this together each year. And this year's theme is more of a global theme. And as we were talking about the topic, we thought, well, we have 3 complete gems of resources here within our building to address this very topic. And so I'm excited for all of you and myself to be able to hear from George, Pat, and Ollie. I'll just give a very brief background, and then I think you'll see from a couple of their qualifications why they're very, very well suited to speak on this topic. So Father Ollie Williams, who's going to go first, he's a Holy Cross priest, and he's director of the Center for Ethics and Religious Values in Business here in Mendoza, and he's on the management faculty. He's a double domer and did his PhD at Vanderbilt. He's also a former naval officer and served as associate provost on campus in the late 80s and early 90s. He's been instrumental in leading the United Nations Global Compact, on whose foundation's board he now serves as a director. He specializes in business ethics, corporate governance, and Catholic social teaching, and he too has spent a lot of time abroad, especially in South Africa and South Korea. We've got George Enderle. He's professor of international business ethics here. He's an expert on the ethics of globalization, wealth creation, and corporate responsibility. He has master's degrees in philosophy and theology, a PhD in economics, and a PhD in business ethics. So he's pretty well studied and well-rounded. He's also incredibly well-traveled. He's logged a lot of time in China, which we'll hear a little bit about today. He co-founded the European Business Ethics Network and is former president of the International Society of Business Economics and Ethics. And then we've got Pat Murphy. He's a marketing professor. Here he's served in the past as chair of that department. He was also co-director of the Institute for Ethical Business Worldwide here in Mendoza. He has both an MBA and a PhD, also went here as an undergrad and majored in marketing. He specializes in business ethics issues in the field of marketing. His recent work is focused on normative perspectives for ethical and socially responsible marketing, distributive justice as it relates to marketing decision-making, and emerging ethical concerns in advertising. He's won multiple Best Paper Awards, multiple teaching awards, and in 2011 he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Marketing Association. He's done sabbaticals both at the Federal Trade Commission and in Ireland, and he also happens to be the person who taught me my first business ethics class, so he got me excited about it, and I'm still doing stuff with it today. So please, let's start with a round of applause for the 3 of them, and just thank them in advance for their time. The format of this, each of them will talk for about 10 minutes or so. We really wanted to carve out a lot of time to make this interactive, so jot down thoughts as you have them, and then we'll make sure that we have plenty of time at the end to ask questions. Does everyone have a handout here? Raise your hand if you didn't get one. Aha!
Okay, let me start. I'm talking about this question of preparing the way for unification on the Korean Peninsula, the experiment of creating shared value. The context for my involvement is I spent the 2012-13 academic year in South Korea. And as you heard from the introduction, I'm on the board of the United Nations Global Compact. This is a social responsibility movement sponsored by the UN. We have 8,000 companies in 130 countries. And basically, companies voluntarily agreed to try to advance human rights in developing countries. And they're doing a lot of very, very good things. One of the questions I was asked to help answer in the United Nations is it the right thing to do for South Korean companies to go into North Korea and employ thousands of people, give them jobs, give them a taste of what it means to live a good life, give them 3 meals a day, a place to live, and at the same time giving the government of North Korea some of the salary. The people of North Korea don't get all the salary. And so, as the handout says, there's a lot of details in the handout. I only had 10 minutes, that's why I provided that for you. Is it the right thing to do? Because on the one hand, you are complicit in supporting a really vicious government. As it says in the handout, the Korean Peninsula is in a constant state of political and military tension, having been divided in 1945 into North Korea and South Korea. North Korea is a socialist, communist dictatorship and a police state, with an underemployed population, a poorly maintained infrastructure, and a very restrictive policy on foreign visitors. South Korea, on the other hand, is a thriving democracy known for its dynamic capitalist economy and openness to global development. The CIA World Factbook posits annual GDP per capita in North Korea as about $1,800, and South Korea is at least 18 times higher. According to the Seoul think tank, basic human rights, things like food, security, and health, among others, are denied to most of the 24 million people in North Korea, while about half the population live in extreme poverty. That's a technical term, meaning less than $1 a day. The World Food Program reports that about 1/3 of the children in North Korea have stunted growth because of malnutrition. CNN had a special on it recently where they compared children in North Korea and South Korea at the same age. And it's about 3 or 4 inches difference in height, just to give you what malnutrition can do. So there's a great attempt to try to influence and break down the ideological differences in North Korea by moving South Korean companies into these enterprise zones. And currently we have one enterprise zone employing 50,000 North Koreans. I'm kind of their ethical advisor. Is this the right thing to do? Because on the one hand, you are supporting a vicious government in North Korea. On the other hand, you're giving 50,000 people the chance to get food and shelter and some taste of what it means to live a good life. And hopefully that will break down ideological differences. And if it is the right thing, why is it the right thing? That's what we call normative ethics, and that's what I do for the United Nations Global Compact. There are questions like this every day that come up. What is the right thing? So it's not so important to say what people think the right thing is, but what is the right thing, and why? Can you make a case in normative ethics? And that's what we try to teach in Mendoza College. We're famous throughout the world for normative ethics, and I suspect that's why I got asked to be a consultant on this project. Anyway, my answer is yes, we should go in there. We should try to give the people some taste of what the good life could be like. And we're going, in my judgment, we're going to expand this from 50,000 North Koreans. We'll probably move to 250,000 in the next year or two. Now, the US government has used economic sanctions to try to curtail the nuclear developments in North Korea, to try to put pressure on the leadership of North Korea. And there's very little evidence that that's working. The problem with sanctions, unless they're very targeted, sanctions just keep the poor poorer. And the people who run North Korea are living, for the most part, better than we live, because they're living high in the hog. Well, most of the country goes to bed hungry. This is the problem, I think, with sanctions and economic policy. It doesn't take into account some targeting of sanctions. I think in Iran, sanctions were targeted very effectively and apparently are working. So sometimes they work, but one size does not fit all. The handout lists the gist of my remarks, and I hope we'll have some good questions. I think probably I'll end it there and let you think about it and ask questions. Thank you very much.
Enderle. I teach international business ethics, and I've been involved in international business ethics for many years. I'm from Europe, and with American friends, and Britain, and from Georgia. Yes, okay. I'm George Enderle. I teach international business ethics, and I've been involved in these questions for many years. First in Europe, and then here at Notre Dame since 1992. What I would like to show you, to present to you in a few minutes, is about the Congress, the World Congress of Business Ethics we are preparing in Shanghai in July next year, 2016. And so this International Society of Business Ethics, we call this, or the Congresses, or the Olympics of Business Ethics. Olympics because it means there are people from all over the world coming together, meeting in the same summer of the Olympic Games, but 2 weeks before the Games start. And so we started here. Here I have a list of what we have done over the years. We met, the first Congress was in Tokyo, in Japan, and here we had the topic about ethics in international business and economics, with reports what's going on around the world. And famous speakers are Amartya Sen from Harvard, who got the Nobel Prize, not after he was speaking in our Congress, not before. Hans Küng is a famous theologian from Germany. In 2000, we went to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and we had Sakiko Fukuda Par from the United Nations Development Program, Mohamed Yunus, famous for microfinance from Bangladesh, and others. And so in 2004, we went to Melbourne, Australia, in 2008 to Cape Town, and in 2012 to Warsaw. And Lech Walesa, the former president of Poland, gave a talk telling us about what Solidarność has done in the 1980s. So that is a little bit context. And now why to China, why to Shanghai? I would like to show you the Chinese government and the World Bank published an important report. It's called China 2030. And this report mentions 6 areas which are very important for China. And we were very much inspired by that because we wanted to have a topic for the Congress which is really close to China, but is also a challenge for people who come from other parts of the world. And the title here is, as you can read, Building a Modern, Harmonious and Creative Society. And it's the World Bank and the Development Research Center of the People's Republic of China that published this report. There are 6, or the questions are about how can China's growth rate still be among the highest in the world, even if it slows from its current pace, what's happening today. And second, can it maintain its rapid growth with little disruption to the world, the environment, and the fabric of its own society in terms of inequalities, etc. And we focused on it's about structural reform, it's about the pace of innovation and create an open, innovative system to go green and expanding opportunities, social security, strengthen the fiscal system, and mutually beneficial relations with the world. So you see, these are huge questions, and we are not pretending that we can solve all those questions. But we thought it is important to focus on one particular thing, the pace of innovation, and to create an open, innovative system. What does that mean? Not just in technical terms or in social terms, but in ethical terms. What can ethics and business ethics contribute? That's it. And now. So we developed a number of themes, and it was interesting with our friends in China when we talked about innovation. They said, well, innovation is anyway is good. And of course, innovation, if you think about computer, if you think about electricity, if you think about railway system, etc., we would say it's good. But innovation can be also bad. The nuclear bomb, was that a good thing or not, you know? So we had a paper at the recent conference about slavery in the UK today, how innovative people are to circumvent legal structure and requirements. Innovation itself can be good or bad. And that's why we think ethics is important, and not just in a descriptive sense, but also in a normative sense. It means, as Professor Williams has said, to do the right thing, to make judgments and to give reasons for it. Now here, this is a long list, and our topic is ethics, innovation, and well-being in business and economy. And so we want to look at innovation as a means to promote well-being for people. And how can ethics contribute to that, to those topics? We see there are different concepts of ethics, key criteria for ethical innovation, many things. I don't go through this list, but it is a fascinating topic, and actually we had a conference here at Notre Dame last October when we prepared those questions in view also of the Shanghai conference last year. Now, the last Now, the question then was, well, who are speakers keynote speakers we would like to invite from all over the world, and how can we find those, and how can we bring them then, and what do we expect them to tell us? We were able to get the commitment from Gro Brundtland. She's a former Prime Minister from Norway, and she was very well the leader in defining sustainability many years ago in 1987. She's coming and talking about climate change and innovation. We have Minister Wei Li. He was the chair of this report I just mentioned, China 2030. We have also Lynn Kane. She's professor of business ethics for many years at the Harvard Business School and published many books. A friend of ours who is coming talking about the point of view of business ethics and innovation. Then we have Martine Durand. She is a French woman from Paris, and she was responsible for a very important report on well-being, how to define well-being. It was published 1 year ago by the OECD, and is probably the best thing which exists today in my view. Then we have also a Chinese philosopher talking about the moral dimension of innovation, Mr. Chan Wang. He's the president of the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. It's a huge research organization in China, the second biggest, with about 800 research professors. And they are hosting our congress. And the president will talk about industrial economy, innovation, and scientific technology and business ethics. We have a professor from the Arizona State University. He's specializing on techno-human innovation. And Georg Kell, he's the executive director of the United Nations Global Compact, which Professor Williams has presented briefly. And then also Fiona Reynolds. She is in charge from London, and she's in charge of the principles for responsible investment. That means in 2006, the United Nations established those principles. We will have a conference here on impact investing, but already in 2006, the question was, what is responsible investment? And so she is going to talk about it. And these are a few perspectives about what we are trying to do in Shanghai, and so that's why I'm going to Shanghai from time to time to see how it is useful. Thank you.
Good afternoon. By way of introduction, it's my pleasure to participate in Ethics Week with my distinguished panelists, Father Williams and Professor Enderle, and also thanks to Ken Milani, Brian Levy, Jessica McManus-Cornell, and Adam, who's busy at work behind me here, for organizing the week's activities. We have one more tomorrow, which I'm sure you heard about. My topic today is, it'll come up in a minute, ethical challenges around the world and focusing on Europe. And I've had three kind of extended experiences in Europe. The first being in the early 1990s, excuse me. I've had a Fulbright fellowship at University College Cork. A bit of trivia for all of you is Cork, Ireland is about the same size as South Bend. And what the Irish said to me was, right name, wrong accent. You're supposed to laugh at that. Okay? If you've ever heard the Irish brogue, I don't have the Irish brogue. The 2009, I had a short-term Fulbright in Lille, France. You're probably not familiar with Lille. It's almost in Belgium. It's about as close to Belgium as South Bend is to Michigan. And then 2 years ago, right now in 2013, I was the faculty in residence at the London program and taught courses in business ethics and European ethics. So I have about 3 slides here, and then we'll turn it to your questions. And if anybody wants a copy of this slide, I'm happy to send it to you. The Institute for Business Ethics, which is headquartered in London, published just in February of 2015 this graph, which was the coverage of ethical issues in the media news stories during 2014. And leading the list, for those of you in the back that may not be able to read it, says treatment of stakeholders - customers. And as a marketing professor, I was pleased to see that in one respect, another respect is the marketers aren't doing their job, but hopefully you all know what stakeholders means, but not treating customers, either over-promising something, selling a lower quality product. It could have many different aspects to it. The second one there is price fixing, which many of you probably know is illegal in the United States, but it's viewed as unethical in the European Union or in Europe. And bribery and corruption, not that bribery and corruption is that much of a problem in Western Europe, which is much like the United States, but we have issues where European companies are bribing foreign officials in either Asia or Africa or places like that, and lots of news stories on that. Executive remuneration, which is a topic that's discussed in the United States a lot, but are CEOs and upper management worth what they get paid? And I think that is, in fact, an ethical issue. I'm not going to go down the list here. Tax, which if you were here for Monday's Ethics Week's presentation, tax and tax avoidance was, in fact, the topic, and there was a lot of discussion about Italy and Ireland and countries in Europe, fraud and theft, which pilferage, things of that nature, fair competition, other kind of marketing topics, mis-selling or overselling. The 2 topics that I was a little bit surprised that weren't higher on the list was the data protection and privacy. I mean, if you pick up the newspaper here almost on a daily basis, you're hearing something on data protection, privacy, and then supply chain issues that most retailers and others are getting products from the developing world, and the treatment of workers not only in Korea but in also other parts of Asia are an important ethical issue. So that's discussion of the ethical issue. I thought some of these companies you're familiar with, but I thought I'd just run through a few companies that I think all companies, like all people, have their warts or they're not perfect, but here's a list of companies that over the years that I think are among the leaders in ethics. The first being the Cooperative Bank, and I first learned about them when I was in Cork in the early 90s. They published an ethical policy, which you can look up on the web, that was used as a standard for investments, and they had about half a dozen of these policies. My favorite one was that they would not invest in blood sports, fox hunting and things of that nature, which the Brits tend, at least some of the upper crust of the British, like to do. But during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, like many other financial institutions, Cooperative Bank fell on hard times. They had some management problems, and they're now just kind of trying to right the ship, if you will. But it's an interesting question of a company that's long had an ethical policy. Can it withstand the test of time? Farah, or Ferrero Rocher, which is known, the U.S. subsidiary is known by chocolate company. My guess is a few of you sampled their products over the years. They have very impressive ethics policies, major principles. Instead of kind of like one value, they put together things like loyalty and trust that are, and these are right on their website. In many companies, their ethical policies are buried. Respect and responsibility, work, create, and donate. And Ferrero Rocher also has both a code of conduct and code of ethics in their social responsibility section. We won't ask for a show of hands of how many of you played with a Lego product over the years, but Lego is headquartered in a little town called Billund, Denmark. On our way to Ireland, we took our 3 sons to the original Legoland in Denmark, and I interviewed an executive, and in every Lego package, most of them have a lot of photographs on the front that if they have it pictured on the package, they say it must be able to be made from the bricks that are inside. You don't have to dig in some other. And also they don't over-exaggerate the size of the bricks, given that they're aimed at children. And does anyone know what the term Lego means? Play well. So next time you're with your nieces and nephews playing with Legos, think about playing well. Novo Nordisk, a company that focuses really on diabetes protection, but a multinational healthcare company, has the Novo Nordisk Way, and they're well known for their ethical stance and ethical policies. And the final one here is Unilever, which is came from a merger from the Netherlands company with the Lever brothers in the UK, and they have a very extensive ethics policy, but sustainability is kind of their talking point at the moment. And when I was in London, their CEO, in fact, Unilever won the Hesburgh Award in 2013, and their CEO, I've known for a number of years, Paul Pullman. This was just, Mr. Enderle shared this with me and another colleague, just yesterday's Financial Times. Unilever under pressure to step up growth rate. Chief defends his vocal stance on global climate and social issues. He wants to double their sales and reduce by half their environmental footprint, which is a very ambitious goal. But the end of this article, I think I'll just read you the last couple sentences, says, for shareholders, however, the issue is whether responsiveness can translate into growth. As another top 20 investor said, Unilever's results are reasonable and Paul Pullman is doing a good job. He is pragmatic on the issues. The problem is that some think Unilever is an amazing growth story, but it's just a solid business with steady growth. And I think that's the problem with short-termism, if you will, in business. There are many other good examples, but I just thought I'd share those with you. And to conclude, a little bit like Professor Enderle, I want to give a little promotion for a series of activities that I've been involved with in marketing ethics and corporate social responsibility. When I was in London in 2013, we had 35 academics. This is an academic conference, not business conference, but you can see the topics, which I'm not going to really go through in any depth here, but dealing with business ethics, marketing ethics. Last year, I went back to University College Cork, and we had about 25 people there examining similar topics, much more on media ethics, which is not surprising. And then I'm in the planning stage for April 2015, where we're going to the Rome program. I don't know if any of you have studied in Rome. I know we have some students that go there, but about 30 academics. There will only be a couple Americans, but this is trying to, I think, from an academic standpoint, look at some of these ethical issues that I shared with you, and we'll also discuss companies like Cooperative Bank and Unilever and others who are on the forefront. And I'll have a, down there on the lower right, it says CO panel, a company panel from Ferrero Rocher and ENI, which is an energy company in headquartered in Rome, was just voted the most transparent company in Europe, which I think would be interesting hearing about. And the CSR, quotes I, is corporate social responsibility and irresponsibility. There are some companies that are irresponsible as well as those that are responsible. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll all be interested in hearing your questions. If you want to elaborate on this or any copy of these slides, be happy to share them. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, great. So I'd love to just start with, I mean, I can always ask questions, but I'd rather have not monopolize the time if there are questions already. Sometimes it takes a few minutes for people to warm up. Anybody ready with the question now? There we go.
I hear you speak of ethics and these things, but I hear you speaking of ethics, and I was just wondering about expansionism. How ethical could expansionism be? Is it imperative that we have expansionism for a healthy economy? Is there any ethics to speak of in true open capitalism?
Well, could you tell us quickly what do you mean by expansionism? Strong economic growth, or?
It could be termed as strong economic growth, but in the way that we have used Hawaii and the Philippines and Japan, and how we carved up China and opened up the markets, the 3P, I forgot the third one, piety, profit, and what have you.
Yes. Well, you know, I think we really need to think about what is a fair and efficient market economy. And so expansionism, if I understand you correctly, is something which puts a lot of emphasis on so-called economic growth and uses means which we would think they are maybe illegal or unethical. And my answer here is twofold. One is, I think we have to think hard about what is the purpose of the economy and business. You know? Is it just maximizing profit, or is it to create wealth in a broad sense? Adam Smith published his book many years ago on the wealth of nations, and he thought that the purpose of the economy of a country is to create wealth in a quite broad sense. And I think we have to go back to understand that and to adapt it to modern situations. From an ethical point of view, I think, as you know, also Notre Dame is very clear and strong about human rights. And not only political and civil human rights, but also social and economic human rights and cultural human rights, as they are defined by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights already in 1948. And today, we are fortunate to have many instruments to apply those ethical guidelines to business, particularly with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And so, I mean, to look at expansionism, my answer would be apply that framework which has been prepared by John Ruggie and others, and to see to what extent do they meet those minimal standards of human rights of the Philippines or expansionism, etc.
Yeah, my comments would be, for my work in Africa, I've been teaching for a month or two in Africa for 15 years, and a month in Asia for the last 5 years, and then I had full years there. When you listen to the people in Vietnam or North Korea, they want a good life, just like you and I share that life. They want well to be created. When I listen to the people in Zimbabwe and Zambia and Tanzania, they want a better life. Many of them go to bed hungry every night. And so how can we create a better life? It seems to me, just following on Professor Enderle's point, growth which is sustainable is what we're after. Can we have growth which is sustainable? It takes into account not only profits, but people on the planet, the bees. And I think that's what we're trying to do in teaching ethics of business.
Okay, I think there was another hand up that I walked past.
Okay, my question was in regard to, I guess, in the last slide, regarding the business ethics issues. And if you pick the top three: treatment of stakeholders, price fixing, bribery, corruption. And then when you think of that, the plans that China has to improve ethics in their country and business practices, and kind of the normative question, what is the right thing to do? How do you approach in a country like China? Where do you start? You know, there's a list of things that are ethics that are questioned. Where do you start in a country of that large? I'm sorry, yeah.
Since you mentioned, I'll start with, I mean, if you're an American company, if you're based in the United States, you must follow the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And in China, sometimes they, as well as other parts of the world, they want some bribe, some payouts, and I'm not going to be naive and say it doesn't happen even by American companies, but I think we're here saying what's the right thing to do. We would say, at minimum, U.S. companies should follow U.S. law, whether you're operating in China, Russia, any other parts of the world. But I think that that's what the Chinese have found, and Professor Enderle is far more of an expert than I am, that if they want to play in the world developing economy, they have to move their standards up as opposed to pull them down. And I think we all agree that the multinational corporations need to raise or hold their first world standards when they're doing business in China and elsewhere. So I'll stop there and turn to my colleague.
Well, to speak about China is not easy, you know, and I realize I was fortunate to study many things, but I still feel that what I don't know is much, much bigger than what I know. And so in business ethics, I think, thanks to the experience of the last 30 years, we have some framework. You know, it's like a map, you know, if you have a map of South Bend, you know, well, in the northeast is Notre Dame, it's not in the southwest. And so if you want to go to Tippecanoe, you have to go west and not east, etc. So that's a framework. And a framework for business ethics is that, well, you know, individual people can change, they can improve, and we have to support them by inviting scholars to come here, or we go to China and do joint projects. We can operate at the organizational level, or we call this the meso level. That means companies we support, or what Professor Murphy said, you know, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act has clear requirement for American companies to do business in China. And by the way, maybe you have heard about it, we had some consultations here now on campus. The question is whether or not the University of Notre Dame should change the China policy, which means should we start buying Notre Dame licensed products from Chinese companies with the logo of the T-shirts and whatever? And so I've been involved in that committee, and we are coming to the conclusion, yes, because there are good companies in China, and we want to work together. You know, these are win-win situations. The third level of answer is much more complicated. And that is, I mean, China is has a different economic system than we have here. How to understand that system? You know, we could say it's a kind of state capitalism. You know, it's not the capitalism like in the Anglo-Saxon countries. It's not capitalism like in Germany or in Japan. It's a different system. And what does that mean for business ethics is very different. But we have to address all three levels.
In the United Nations Global Compact, as I mentioned, we have 8,000 companies in 135 countries. 300 major companies in China are members of the United Nations Global Compact. And if they're a member, they agree to try to advance 10 principles. One is to try to advance human rights. The second is to try to advance the labor issues, respect the dignity of their workers, anti-discrimination, child labor, all kinds of problems. The third key issue is leave the environment better than you found it. And the fourth is fight corruption. And now, because a company signs up doesn't mean that they've realized all these things. It means they aspire towards them. And I have met with a lot of CEOs of Chinese companies, and they do aspire towards them. I liken it to, you know, all of us go to a church on Sunday or a mosque, and if we had to realize all the ideals of Christianity before we get into church, none of us would be there. Or maybe some of you would be there. I would be there. But we go anyway because we aspire towards a certain set of ideals. And similarly, a company joins the UN Global Compact because they aspire. They know they're not where they want to be yet on human rights and corruption. The Central Communist Party has laid down two key points they're working on: pollution and corruption. And they're actually putting people in jail who violate that. So I would say, as an ethicist, I always look at, are we better off today than we were 10 years ago in China on human rights? I think we're much better off. And pollution, environmental pollution. So I like to tell you it's all black or white. There's one heck of a lot of gray out there.
Thank you. How about another question?
Yeah, my question's kind of simple. It's just, how do you promote ethical behavior to like a corporation when a lot of times that can be sort of detrimental to the overall profit of the company? Like if you're adhering to, you know, environmental standards or being philanthropic or what have you.
Well, it's a big and important question, and I cannot give you a short answer. But and I certainly think that the professor has not much influence. But if you look at best practices of corporations, Professor Murphy mentioned Unilever. Unilever is an outstanding ethical company as far as I know. Why? Well, first, the tone of the talk. The leaders say ethics is important for our culture. They introduced strategies and policies and trainings for people to understand how to address ethical issues. An interesting further element is in the United States we have the so-called ethics officers and ethics and compliance officers in almost all large companies. Tomorrow we have a speech by the ethics officer from the United Nations. What is their job? Well, they have to look at first to define the credo, or what are the principles, ethical principles of the organization, and what are the means to achieve, to improve that. and how to control that and how to redesign the incentive structures for promotions, for sanctions, for punishment within the companies. Another important element is the reporting, corporate reporting. How does Unilever or any company report about what they have done, not just in terms of profit, but in terms of environmental behavior, in terms of violation or not violation of human rights, etc. And here we have instruments we did not have 15 years ago. And there are hundreds of companies using them. They have to use it. And so if we, in education, here at Notre Dame, can help you, to understand there are good companies out there, make a choice when you choose your job, Look at companies where you feel at home, and there are lots of possibilities to improve.
I suppose it gets back to an earlier point made. One of the things I learned in spending a year in Asia, and I go over for a month in July every year, is they have a much longer term horizon. They're not so worried about the quarterly profits, and therefore under so much pressure to compromise their values. So if you look at the long term, taking care of the environment makes good sense financially. Short term, maybe it's going to be a little costly at the beginning. So I think looking at the long term enables you to really take a sustainable approach. And I think that's where we can learn something from our neighbors in Asia.
I agree. The long-term, short-term is an important issue. And as Professor Enderle said, there are a lot of corporate reports. The thing that all of you in this room have more power than any of us had 10 years ago. And that is the blogosphere, Twitter, social media. If a company is cutting corners or taking advantage of people or cell phone cameras, I mean, not saying all that's on the social media sphere is always ethical, but I believe that the world is shrinking. People are, as you all know, much more connected than we all were not that long ago, and therefore I think it behooves companies to try to live up to their principles, and if they're going to take advantage of customers or take advantage of employees or other stakeholders, it's likely to be found out, if not tomorrow, in very recent times. And this goes for things happening around the world because people are so well connected. So think of your own power as consumers and advocates if you see things that you don't think companies are living up to their principles.
Another question? Yep, over here.
So North Korea is notorious for its propaganda. I was just wondering if how they're talking about this industrial complex, where the workers are, if it's how they're telling us or the government.
A very good question, and the answer is they're not. The government's not talking about the industrial complex, and they are getting some money, and therefore they're tolerating it. But, for example, there are 125 South Korean companies involved in this Kaesong industrial complex, employing 50,000 people right now. And sometimes they give them little special treats, like cupcakes and things like that. Well, the North Koreans got wind of this and said, you cannot give them anything like that, any sweets. They love them. Because you're interfering with our ideological education by giving them these things. So they are monitoring a bit, but they don't talk about this to the wider population. It's not part of their propaganda. And, as you may know, there's a famous basketball player gets over here. And I tell this Digger Phelps is a social friend of mine. We've been for years. We have breakfast together once in a while. And I told Digger that I'm up to it. North Korea, he said, I've got someone I'm going to put you in touch with next time he goes over. And I said, Digger, I will never talk to you again. Somehow we can get in.
On perhaps maybe more of a general level, I'd love to hear a little bit of each of your perspectives, having seen the way business is done in other societies very different from ours. There's this whole idea of cultural relativism and the idea of trying to make normative assertions in a world that people might have very, very different backgrounds and cultural beliefs. Could you just touch on that a little bit, the idea of actually they're looking for universal norms when it comes to ethics?
Well, that's certainly an important issue, you know, and if you just start learning some languages, you realize that languages are different, and not only the words, but also the culture behind. And so we are naive to believe that everybody understands English when we talk about the whole world. It's not true. They speak Hindi and they speak Spanish and Russian and many other languages. So there is a huge diversity, first of all. The question then in ethics is not, and I think ethics should be happy about that diversity. We should not strive for a uniform global culture. That would be horrible, horrible. We should really affirm that diversity, but then the question is, but they are ethical issues, and for me again, these are the minimal level, these are human rights issues, and how to understand that and how to promote that. Is this just a question of feelings, or is this a prejudice of Western tradition, or can we find universal values which are supported? Well, interestingly enough, you know, we have in the tradition of faith and religious traditions a moral principle which is about 2,500 years old. The golden rule, you know, treat others as you want to be treated by them. And you can find that in Hinduism, you can find it in Confucianism, you can find it in Judaism, in Christianism, in Muslim, in Zoroastrian religion, and many others. This is a common ground. And we have that principle not thanks to the social media and internet, but it was developed in different cultures separately. So to say that we just everything goes and everything is relative is, I think, from an empirical point of view, already highly questionable. But then we have to work and to find out what does it mean, human dignity in China or in Russia and so on. These are this work in progress. This is not a done deal.
Well, this was the issue when we first started the UN Global Compact in the year 2000. What would the principles be? Are there universal principles that everyone in the world agrees on? And at first we had a discussion amongst philosophers, and the then Secretary General Kofi Annan said, you philosophers will be talking for 20 years. But he said, we've already got the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, which was passed by all nations of the world. And although we order those rights differently, in China they have social and economic rights ahead of civil and political rights, but they still aspire towards those. And so we have a more general set of principles. The first one says respect human rights. That's principle one. And that's agreed upon. That isn't debated by the United Nations. We have 193 nations in the world who basically have agreed to that. Principles on the environment, anti-corruption, and labor. So there is agreement. As Professor Enderle pointed out, the devil is in the details. When you come to doing particular cases, it gets where you need a lot of discussion. But I think we do have a core agreement on the 10 principles.
just add a couple more things, that in places where bribery and corruption still occurs, that, you know, in a relative ethics standpoint, unfortunately, it's the either political elite or the business elite that people like all of us in this room say, you know, fair day's work for fair day's pay, which we could debate on that particular point. But the idea is that you know, companies and organizations need to, you know, aspire to more universal set of principles, and that, like the companies that I put up here, I think are ones that are not willing to compromise in principles if they're going into Russia or going into Asia. And I think that's where multinational corporations have an opportunity to say, you know, we're not playing the relative ethics game, that we have these standards and we're willing to do so. And I interviewed an executive at Procter & Gamble in the early 1990s in Italy. You probably all heard the phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, which meant bribe. And he said, there's a grudging respect by the Italians at that time, over 20 years ago, for us, that meaning P&G, because we don't bribe. And I think we've improved substantially since then, but as my colleague said, we have a ways to go.
Okay. Yeah, let's do time for one more question. Yeah.
So you guys talk a lot about ethics in, you know, developed countries. So how do you advocate ethics to a non-developed country? Because it seems it's easier to be ethical when you have the money to be ethical, when you have the money to pay for the environmental standards and things like that. So how do you advocate it to a less developed nation that doesn't have those capabilities to be ethical as easy?
Yes, it's difficult when you don't have the rule of law, but if I could liken it to something that many of you are studying probably here at Mendoza, and that's entrepreneurship, and you're, you know, starting a new business. They say, well, it's easy for the IBMs of the world to be ethical. But my point would be, you set the standards early on, and I think for these economies, we need to help them, A, develop the rule of law, and work with them on giving, you know, a living wage, as we talk about, and not trying to exploit the workers. So I think business has a large role to play in building infrastructure and things of that nature. But it's a long pull. There's a lot of discussion in recent days about Haiti and how difficult it is in a country like that. But I think that business does have a strong role.
Yes, well, my short answer is, again, we have to look at it from the individual level, what individuals actually can do, what can organizations do, and how we have to change the systems. Was it yesterday or before yesterday, on the PBS NewsHour at 7 or 6 o'clock, we had an entrepreneur from the slums in Mumbai. You know, how is that man who didn't understand anything able now to organize people in the slums of Mumbai and to build thousands of decent apartments and houses? Well, people, and another example is on the other side of the subcontinent of India, in Bangladesh. Mohamed Yunus started, he did his PhD at Vanderbilt here in 1974, went back to his country, started the microfinance movement, and today he got the Nobel Prize in Peace for that. And how entrepreneurial he was, and very smart, and developed that. So I think we should expect much more from people actually working in developing countries, and not just to think they are underdeveloped, they need our money. That's not enough. Other examples are M-Pesa in East Africa, with that banking system with mobile phones, you know, that works for thousands and thousands of people. And we have a professor here who is quite informed and studies it. So there are lots of interesting things. We have to open the eyes and
I think we'll always have corruption with us. How many governors in the state of Illinois are in jail today? 3. But I think in my work in developing countries, I try to point out that if you look at the history of the United States, which is relatively free of corruption, relatively, you can see that 100 years ago it was a terrible problem in New York, Chicago. And how did it get better? It got better because people wouldn't tolerate it. They clamored, put people in jail. If you want to take bribes, you're going to get caught. Some of you at least. And so you'll have to arouse the people. That's what I try to do with developing countries. Point out that you can stop corruption if you won't tolerate it. And you have to energize the people. And I think we've met the enemy, and it is, I was going to say us, but it should be we. My mother was a grammar teacher.
Well, I just want to make sure that we take a moment and genuinely thank our three presenters. Before you put your coats on and walk out the door, I just want to say, you know, Mendoza has a reputation for being strong in ethics, and those of you who are students here will benefit from that reputation as you move on. You may be hired because of that. And I just want to say that you owe that in huge part to these three gentlemen who have done with their careers a staggering amount of legwork in the field of business ethics. So our hats off to you three. Thank you.